is the finance section. My name is Dan O'Donnell. I'm the budget director. I'm going to be here facilitating with Christine Collins, our treasurer collector, Alice Farrow, our town accountant, and just want to show something that's out on the board up here. Basically, we have a focused discussion today. First, we're going to start with capital, and then we're going to talk about our Middlesex and OPEB unfunded liabilities. We're going to wrap up with a quick discussion regarding our bond ratings at the end. So, just as ground rules, you probably saw them in the first meeting. I can call on you. You can, if you have a question. We're just going to have a back and forth. I don't want to speak too much. I want to hear what you have to say. That's the whole point of this. So, I'm going to give a brief intro about capital, which is actually in your package, which we handed out. So, basically, in your handouts, it includes the town's definition of capital, which is anything over $10,000 and lifespan over 5 years. It contains some information about the capital planning process, the ways in which department heads are looking for alternate sources of funding, and it also has a list of items approved at this last town meeting. And finally, it has, on the last page, has a section called Available Funding Sources, which equates to about $7.5 million in pay-as-you-go funding. Well, this capital request over here shows $42 million in requests over the next 5 years. So that's the issue we're facing right now. I'm going to open it up for discussion. People have questions, comments about what they want to see funded, how the process works, anything. So we do have some pre-approved questions in there too. If anybody has no cards, that's fine. The takers? All right, we'll go to the worksheet. Sure, John.
How much money is usually set aside every year in capital?
$1.5 million per year.
Is that a rule or is that just a practice?
That's a general basis. We also we've been working with our debt as well. So basically, what we did last year is we set a threshold of $1 million within the tax levy to be set aside for capital, and basically it's a good way moving forward to bond those larger items. Last year we bonded a fire truck, a bunch of designs. What else did we bond? Dump truck. Yep.
Over 500, right?
Yeah, it was usually things over 500,000, but last year, because we're in a financial pinch, we actually budgeted for a couple boilers as well, just so we could get the capital that we needed that year. Marilyn? It didn't go up, it maintained the same rating. To go up. We're actually going to talk about that last. Christine has that, but I appreciate the question. It's AA for S&P. It's AA plus for S&P and AA2 for Moody's. Harvard?
The $1.5 million for capital seems a little bit on the low side given the size of the town's budget. Do you have any metrics from other towns or from the municipal association that suggest a certain percentage of capital expenditure for a budget of our size?
Mike, we actually went to a FinCom meeting, and what was the town that had that they're discussing with the capital?
The town that actually presented was Arlington, and they actually do about 10% per year. Now, what gets interesting, that 1% is all relative to the actual planned footprint of the town. By the way, Michael Brinksey, I'm chair of the finance committee. That 1% is relative to the balance sheet of the town and the replenishment. And if you figure that 1%, it's going to take us about 100 years to replace all the capital in the town. Use that as a measure, and 10% is probably high. Probably somewhere in the 6 to 8% range should be what we'd aspire to. Again, some of the constraints of the current fiscal crises have actually constrained us quite a bit. We've made trade-offs in where those monies get allocated from a tax dollar perspective, as we make some decisions that do affect the tax rate.
Very good. John, down here?
We're actually spending more than that
Because of the borrowing, yes.
we're spending more than that for the 1.5 million because the borrowing is down.
John was saying we actually spent more than 1.5 million this past year. If you look at your detail in your packet, it shows 861,000 days ago, another $2 million in items that were bonded. So it's more around $3 million we were able to spend this past year.
Because that bonding was over X number of years, it's an annual budget cost on top of the 800,000 bonded projects. That's the number that's comparable. Bond cost plus pay for the annual control of those two is here.
Yep. It's in the packet. It's about $3 million, give or take. Any other questions regarding capital at this time? Yes, sir.
Question. What's our total bond debt? And if we refinance everything to get the best available rate increase?
Christine, total debt, top of your head?
Can you repeat it?
What's the total bond debt? And have we refinanced every possible bond we can?
Yeah, we just refinanced two more pieces that came up as the potential. You can't refinance it at the same time with one leg, yeah.
So what are the numbers?
The total debt is 68 million,
Okay.
more or less.
And what's the sort of average interest rate?
That's hard to say because the interest rate right now, we just bonded at 2.38, I believe. And some of the notes on the books are in the 4% or more range. So I don't know what the average is. It's not going to be a straight average anyway. For a very large fund, a large portion of it, that rate is going to go to the average. So I don't see.
But I understood you to say you refinance everything that you can refinance.
Every possible thing, yeah?
Every time we do a bond issue, we don't want to refinance just for the sake of refinancing because it's closing costs and all that. But every time we do a bond issue, we review existing issues to see if we have anything else.
You saved only about 60,000 by refunding, that's who says
All right.
Good
Any other-
job.
Mark?
So, I understand that Chapter 90 funds have been significantly reduced for the upcoming fiscal year.
That's right.
We have a sense of how much of that's going to come forward in the department's capital budgets for going forward.
We haven't sent out the capital requests yet, but I assume that the 671,000 won't be enough for the repairs that Chip wants to do. So I don't know if we're gonna have to supplement that or if he's gonna ask for additional in his operating budget or what will happen at that point. But we haven't had that discussion. All right.
I will just say, in terms of, not to hone in here, but in terms of the Chapter 90, last year, the governor sent, the state sent us a survey asking us about all our roads, all our bridges, our dams, and what infrastructure we needed to repair. And we submitted that, and I think what the governor found out is they were woefully underfunding us in Chapter 90. I personally think this is a political statement that's being made right now. We do start funding, but I mean, it's been on your mark, this is a bad place to be. You should have road and like protection, but I think that we're going to lobby and hopefully they will reinstate those funds for next year. It's ridiculous for them to cut those funds when in fact our needs are quadruple what we need every year. So I'm, hopeful that we'll see that come back in the fall.
All right, I'll give Jody the last word
Sorry,
on.
right, I'm gonna get back.
Okay. Jody's got the last word on capital, so we might switch over and talk about the Millis Extra Time Assessment now. And Christine's going to present that.
So, in case any of you don't know me, I'm Christine Collins. I'm the tax collector treasurer. I've been here for about 2 years. I have been a municipal treasurer for over 20 years, so I am familiar with the Middlesex retirement system. The Middlesex retirement system has been in existence since 1912, and part of the problem that we are dealing with now stems back all the way to the beginning. you know, our topic discussion says, what's the issue? And that's what I hope to explain in a short amount of time so I can give you some chance to answer some questions or ask some questions, but it is a little complicated. In 1912, they started the retirement system. At that time, people were only paying, the employee share was 5%. As time went on, those shares were increased. You can see it on that slide. It's also in your packet. But it took a very long time before they started to acknowledge what we now know as the unfunded liability. In the 1970s, they started to get an actuarial review of the retirement system and started to acknowledge the number, but they still were not required to fund it within a certain period of time. In the 1980s, they were required by the state legislature under Chapter 32B or 32 to start to fund it, and they were required to get an actuarial study done every 3 years. At that time, it's since been moved to every 2 years. The actuarial evaluation tries to tell us what our obligation to existing pensioners is. For every town that's in the Middlesex retirement system, their individual experience is what they are charged for. So Westford gets Westford's bill. It's not like we're taking on a share of the whole system. It's only Westford's bill. Our unfunded liability is $41 million. So the way that we got here was, first of all, the employee contributions were too low for many years. They raised it for the first time in 1975 to 7%, in 1984 to 8%, in 1996 they raised it to 9%. Any earnings over $30,000 since 1979, employees pay an additional 2%. So you have people paying about 11% of probably a little less than half of their pay for the average person. A person in that category at 9% now is, if they stay in the system under a regular retirement age and retire without being disabled or any other strange things, just with normal retirement at a normal retirement age, and they start when they're, like I did, in their 20s, they will have paid their entire cost out of their own contributions. So going back into the employee to try to raise the contribution rate for employees, PARAC, the government agency that oversees pension systems in Massachusetts, has said enough is enough. You can't go back to the employees for any more. 3 ways to fund the retirement system: employee contributions, employer contributions, that's the town's assessment, and investment income. In the early 2000s, well, let's go back even further. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, when the investments were through the roof, and there's a chart here, if you wanted to look at it, this is 1995. That number is 22% return on investments.
Good old days.
That was the good old days. But they made a huge mistake in the good old days. Instead of taking those extra earnings that they were getting in the late 1990s, they turned around, actually it was through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, they reduced town assessments because the towns were still adjusting to Prop 2.5, which came in the early 1980s. So the towns put pressure on the Middlesex retirement system to reduce assessments, which they did, and so consequently they made no progress toward the unfunded liability. They assumed that these rates are something better than what we're seeing now, would continue forever. Then the 2000s came. Anybody remember? 2000, 2001, 2002, 2008, and it decimated the retirement system in every way we can imagine. That's how we got here. So I just want to make sure everybody understood. The unfunded liability is real, but it took a long time to get here. And they've learned a lot of things about how we got here, so I don't think those mistakes are going to be repeated. We are currently on track to be fully funded by 2035, which is 23 years. I have a 23-year-old daughter. It seems like she was a baby just yesterday, so I think that, we're going to get through this, but it's going to take some time. So are there any questions about our unfunded liabilities?
And we participate in the Middlesex County, we're not pooled into the state.
We are not pulled into the state retirement system. We're participating in Middlesex. Middlesex has, I think, 74 communities in it. But we have our funds invested with an agency called PRIM, which is tied into the state somehow. It's where the state school teachers' money is all from.
I'm not sure it's good or bad, but do we have any options? Could we opt into the state, the total state package, or we
I do
stuck?
not believe that we could. I don't believe that we could for our municipal employees. But even if we did, we still have the unfunded liability to pay. Because we owe
I'm
it.
just talking about doing that.
Yeah. I don't believe we could, but I will find out. I don't know that for sure.
Just to note, the majority of our employees being in the school department are not part of that system,
That's
except for
correct.
clerical support staff. So they're funded by the state retirement system.
That's correct. Which the town does not contribute to. Yes, they have, they have mandated that the towns have, or the retirement system has to be fully funded by 2040. Our retirement system has told the actuary that does our assessment evaluation and all that to schedule it to be paid off by 2035. And we're hoping that that will give us a little bit more breathing room if anything catastrophic happens again.
So I appreciate the information that it's going to be paid off in a certain amount of time. I had heard, and I don't have a good understanding of this, but I had heard that there could be some potential changes in the law that would require towns to provide funding sooner than 23 years, to provide some additional funds and not just work through the 23 years when it will be fully funded because you'll have so many people contributing at the higher amount. So can you talk about any potential liability or surprises that we might have if there's a change in the law requiring us to provide those monies sooner rather than the 23 years?
Well, they did look into, this whole change to 2040 just happened in 2011, I believe, or 2010. There's been, pension reform law has been going on since 2009 or 2008 when the big crash happened. And then assessments started to go up. And they started to see our unfunded liability just all of a sudden bloomed because the returns weren't going to be there. The investment returns weren't going to be there to help contribute. So they did quite a few things, and it's in the brochure, in the packet, the major legislative changes. But that discussion about 2040, that happened over the course of probably at least a year. When they finally came out with 2040, I think they were settled on it. I haven't heard anything more about them making us pay it in a shorter amount of time. But let me ask you guys a question. So the whole reason we're reporting all of this and getting actuarial evaluations is because we have to behave on paper, on the books, like a business. So what they're really saying is if you went out of business tomorrow, what would your obligation be to the existing retirees? And my question sometimes, as we've gone through all this heartache, is how likely is it that the town of Westford will go out of business? And is 2040, if this started in 1912, and they didn't start to address it until 1986, how feasible is it that we're actually asking one generation to pay for the cost of maybe two generations?
I don't mean to ask one.
Yeah, no,
I need
that's
some
okay.
context.
Yeah,
There's a $41 million unfunded liability.
right.
Now, I assume that is based on the current employee base.
No,
and
just retirees.
how many retirees do we have?
Over 500. Chrissy, can you repeat the question? Oh, I'm sorry. He asked, tell me your question again.
Oh, I'm asking some context.
Yeah.
How many
How many
employees,
retirees?
retirees are in this unfunded
Yeah.
liability? And then I assume that's based on actuarial paper.
Right.
So we have 500.
We have, I had it somewhere, I think. We have over 500 500. What is it? Oh, I'm sorry. We have 500 participants, 158 retirees. Thank
So
you.
this, so I'm having trouble with the math.
It's their potential for all of their lifetime.
So 150, what
158
what I'm hearing is
retirees.
158 retirees with a $41 million liability. That doesn't,
But that's gonna cover me and Dan,
Right.
Christine,
Current
and,
employees.
but that's not retirees.
but it's a potential retirement.
No, but you gotta help me out.
It's part of that.
Yeah. We can come back. You can come by my office anytime. I have the whole actuarial evaluation, and maybe it would help to see it.
And I'm not one to monopolize this, but it's a big issue for
It
the
is.
town.
It is.
And
Well, it's also past retirees.
yeah, for sure, but you
Because
gotta put it in the
they didn't
context that we
contribute
can
enough.
understand.
The town didn't contribute enough, and the employees didn't contribute enough for a very long time. So it's not just the current ones; it's the money that's owed to the system.
But as I understand it, this covers police and fire and other time.
That's
So
correct.
police and fire can retire early at 55, and you know, it is. And the town employee needs to have
They need to be at least 60.
65 is the new one. New
65
hires, but
and-
62.
Which is all part of that actuarial study. They look at ages and,
you know, you're not going to do it now. I would recommend to you, if you come back to this topic next year, put that in some kind of a chart that's understandable.
Okay,
We can
that
post
sounds
some
like a good
information online
idea.
too.
Yeah.
But not to cut off this topic, but I'm going to jump to our other unfunded liability, the OPEB liability, which I will be talking about all year and probably my rest of my career here. So OPEBs are other post-employment benefits besides pensions. Basically in Westford, they're health insurance and life insurance. Now, this liability is growing much faster than Middlesex liability because we're not addressing it much at this point. We've only allocated $200,000 towards it the past 3 years. Just to give it some context, in FY09, we had our first actuarial study performed. We had a $55 million liability. In FY11, it was $67 million. And just last week, we got back our one for FY13. It's $72 million. So this is skyrocketing because we're not funding anything towards it. So the difference between this and Middlesex retirement liability is that, sorry, plane's overhead too, it's hard to hear, is that this is not mandated to be funded at this point. So a lot of communities aren't funding anything. A lot are trying to pre-fund and really get ahead of liability, just in case the state mandates it at some point. That's my spiel. I want to open up to questions about this. Mark?
Is it the same 160 people, 158 people that are represented by that? Okay.
No, this is everybody.
So
Yes.
it's not apples to apples with
No.
40.
Right. This is everybody who's currently working and who's retired.
So that's correct. So that's over
Useful.
2,000.
1,000 are eligible.
1,000.
Yeah. Yeah. So
How many paid Medicare? How many would be eligible for Medicare?
everybody is eligible for Medicare at age 65. Town employees, school employees pay Medicare. So at that time, they switched to a much cheaper plan. It's actually mandated. Yes.
These other benefits are including existing employees.
Yes.
Liabilities for that. We are not paying commercial insurance for this.
Commercials?
We're not self-insuring.
No, we're not self-insuring. No, we belong to a regular plan. So, yes. Oh, okay. Yeah, we are doing pay-as-you-go, which is about $2 million per year for retirees. However, as I'm working here today, I'm accruing a future liability of insurance for when I retire, hopefully retire someday. So it's all about funding that liability when the service is received rather than passing it on to a future generation of taxpayers. That's the whole reason for GASB 45 and OPEB liability. Yes, yeah, it's for insurance for retirees. Yeah, it's not our current health insurance budget for active employees. It's retirees only.
Current employees.
Current,
Current employees.
yes. I believe so. I'm sorry. What is that question again?
We're talking about health insurance.
Yes.
Disability insurance.
Just health and life insurance.
That's not life insurance.
Yeah, and life is a very small amount. It's mostly health insurance. Right. Yes, they pay 40%. The town pays 60%. Right, because that's part of the pay as you go. We're paying $2 million in retiree costs each year, but we're getting no benefit from those employees who are currently retired. For medics, they can have a +1, so it could be their spouse too. Yep, it's 40% for each person on the plan.
So both the retiree and the spouse pay 40%.
That's correct. Yep. One premium, but double the price if there's two people on it. So.
But we participate in the state plan.
No, not for health. No.
You know that?
No, we're not on the GIC.
I don't think people heard that.
Yeah, we're not currently on the GIC for our health plan. We're enrolled in Tufts right now.
Is that the best? I'm under the impression there's some benefit from pooling the state.
Going to state. Yes, it's a.
Dan, repeat the question.
If there's some benefit for pooling with the state, basically going on to the GIC, basically you get what you pay for. There's high deductibles coming out of this plan, and it's a much lower benefit for employees. But yes, we would save some money for the town if we did enroll into the state. But at what cost to the employees? I mean,
It is an issue, it's a bargaining issue.
no, yes, the Board of Selectmen have the authority to make health plan design changes.
But
So,
we're here talking about the finances of the town. Oh, Maryland.
Then it's also, the state has put out, was it last year, which said that it looked like if you come within a certain percentage, that your plan meets the same, whatever your threshold is, that the GRC does, you do not have to switch. So this town keeps itself as close as it can, to the mandates of the state, not 100%. It's not all the GRC.
I'm really pushing for information because everybody, cost pressure, healthcare is pushing, and so the community's going to want to know what's the best deal, both employees
Best value?
and yes.
the best value.
And for the best cost.
That's a great question. I'll put that up there, but I don't have the answer for you right now. So, Jim.
My understanding was, and maybe I misunderstand it, was that the town's health insurance cost for the town
Yes.
is less expensive than if it were to join the state GIC. Is that incorrect? That's what I thought I heard in some of the discussions. The overall cost per employee of the towns is less costly than joining the state.
I've heard
Because of the percentage contributions mostly.
right. Westford we contribute 65%, and the average in the state is 75%. John, you want to address that?
Yeah, I don't know that we have that information to say that it's less costly, but I think what we may be referring to is that most towns that are in the GIC are the towns, the bigger cities that have the high contribution rate for the employer, 85%, 80%, 75%. The town of Westford has a 65% contribution rate, so that going to GIC wouldn't achieve the same value as it has for other communities that go to the GIC. That's the difference.
You say that this underfunding, the liability is increasing.
It is increasing. Yep.
So, for example, like future retirees, like you,
Yep.
future retirees, cost for health insurance is continuously being not funded.
Exactly.
Why do we do?
That's the question. That's why we're here. I want to solicit suggestions on how to fund
Nobody
this.
asked the question. Why are you doing it?
That's a good question. Because people didn't recognize this liability back till 2005.
Why not?
Why not?
Why didn't they recognize it?
Yeah, I wasn't here in 2005. I'm not sure. Basically, yes. So
To me, it's very simple. It has to be funded.
that's I would agree with you, Dennis. Yes.
Dan, just to answer that question, my name's Dennis Roden, I'm on the Finance Committee. I read the audit, and if we, right now, Dan said we're paying $2 million per year just for the retiree medical benefits. If we wanted to fully fund it, it would be $6.5 million. So it would be $4.5 million more to the town and a little over $100 million budget. It's a huge chunk to say, well, why don't we fund it? It's a big step going from yes, we should fund it to saying, where will we get $4.5 million more every year for the next 30 years?
But we can't put it in the sack.
And that's why we're here.
We cannot do it.
But that's why we're here.
So some communities have started pre-funding this. Basically, like Dedham, what they did was they had health plan designs, and the savings from that they put towards OPEBs to help pay for this future liability. I thought that's a very conservative thing to do. Wellesley, they went for a Prop 2.5 override to start funding this liability for $1.8 million, and they raised $1 million under the tax levy. I don't know if people have the appetite to do that or not here, but it's an option. Let's see, Wakefield, they moved to the GIC, took those savings, put it into OPEB. And there was another community, I forget what community it was, but they actually took out a bond to fund the liability. So if you pre-fund it, the liability shrinks because you're earning income on that liability over the next 30 years through that actuarial study. So basically, if we thought we had a $72 million liability, it shrinks like $45 million because we're earning interest on that liability. And then we're just paying back the bond over the time that it takes to fund it. So we don't have to fully fund this, that's the thing. We can have other ideas, like for any new employee, we could start funding their costs. So we gradually build into it, rather than decimate the town all at once. So I'm open to ideas, if anybody has suggestions, or Margaret?
Not so much suggestions, as an understanding of the demographic, and when that shifts, that $2 million is going to be a significantly higher amount of money. Have you done projections like that? And secondly, is anyone actively investigating solutions that could potentially provide the town with options, saying if we fund it early and start to do X things, then we will save ourselves this kind of money down the line? Who's actively investigating this on the town? So those two questions.
We hired an actuarial to actually put this report together, who I call all the time with questions. So he did put together a cost analysis of the normal costs, that if we didn't fund it, how would that react over time? I can put those online on the finance website. So I'll post the entire report there, actually.
And my second question about that bubble, the demographic shift when that so how do you see these costs increasing in the future based on the shift in folks retire?
That's complicated because it's based on actual information from current employees. So it's like a 60-page analysis. So it takes into consideration their ages now, a certain percentage retired at every age, life expectancy, and so on. So I don't have it memorized at this point, but I'm sure I will soon. But
so let me ask you another question. And if they were to, as Social Security has done, to increase the retirement age to 66 and disincentivize people from retiring earlier, could we impose similar kinds of requirements for municipal employees, and what potential impact would that change them?
Well, they started doing that at the state level with the pension reform. So Group 1 employees are now 65.
65?
For Group 1, like office employees like us and highway, non-public safety, public safety are now at 55. And yeah, that will reduce the outlying costs for future employees, new hires. All that.
New hires only?
Right. Exactly. Bill. Yeah, they use 5% as an annual increase each year to the rate. Marilyn? I haven't had time to go through every community, but I had a small list, example of people who are pre-funding. Absolutely, sure. Well, that's. I can't answer that at this point. I agree that I think the system's broken too, but yes.
The one suggestion I would make, this is very complicated stuff.
Yep.
GIC is not one plan, it's a group of plans. The median increase last year was 1.5%, not the best plan, not the least plan, the median increase. Much smaller than ours, and has been for years. And I think there are various people with expertise here. If this could all be put up on the town website, where people could study what the options are, I think it would be much more productive than these
That's the
meetings.
5-minute warning at the end of the session.
Put your suggestion down. We'll see what we can do. One last question.
Question, to tag along what you're saying, in isolation, that sounds great. But you have to have the other facts and communities and the cost borne by the employees of every town to make it fair. Because GIC is not always moving. So if you're putting that out there, you also have to hear what other benefits do you not. Again, you can't compare and say, this community to someone that gets 85% or salary. So you can't do an isolation. I'm not saying, but you need a lot more facts to have a wise decision.
And that's exactly what I suggested. That to be up to people.
Right, but I'm just saying it's broader than just that.
Okay. On that point, we're going to switch over and finish up with Christine. She's going to talk about the bond rating, which ties back to Marilyn's first question.
Yeah, so just really quickly, our bond rating right now, we just had a rating in May. S&P is a AA+, Moody's is a AA2. S&P actually has us rated a little bit higher. You can see the rating chart is up here if you wanted to come up and see where we stand later. The things that they like about Westford is our location near diverse employment centers. We're close to Boston and major routes. We have strong household incomes. We have strong market value in our houses. We have an experienced management team, and we do multi-year planning. We have a low debt burden and above average amortization, which means that we're paying things off. You know, it's going down at a steep rate. And we have a history of doing debt exclusions. Those are the things that they like about us. The suggestions they have for us to make the rating go up is that we could increase our reserves, which after hearing what we've said about liabilities, that you can understand how difficult that can be. But we want to protect what we have. This is important, you know. We do want to protect those reserves. We hear often, well, we have all this money. Well, we really don't have all this money. It's not a very large percentage. We need to develop formalized financial management policies, which we hope you'll be hearing more about in the next couple of years. Included in that management policy would be a plan for dealing with OPEB. So that's why we put all of these things together. We thought they were very relevant to one another. We need to identify funding sources as part of the capital process. That was one of their suggestions. And balance capital funding through the use of planned debt exclusions. So as we are looking at that capital budget, we know that we could fit in, ladder in some debt exclusions along the way. And there's a lot of excluded debt coming off the books over the next few years, so there's opportunity there. And they want us to restructure our budget process to generate and use less free cash, which means less conservative budgeting in some ways. And what would make the rating go down? A decrease in reserves, significant increase in debt burden without debt exclusions, and erosion of the tax base through valuation declines. So that's my
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Do you get to sell to them our goodness?
We do,
Okay, my question is,
and I'm a pretty good cheerleader too.
perfect. So I think we should promote that we have schools that are outstanding and we're paid less than the state average.
All right.
And that ought to be front and center, I think, on our bond rate.
Okay, it makes it a desirable community.
Well,
They
no,
do
no,
look
but
at
it
that.
shows that we're fiscally prudent and
Yes.
manage things well.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?